Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. In this episode, we're traveling to one of the most isolated countries in the world, Turkmenistan, a landlocked country that makes North Korea seems like a bustling tourism hotspot in comparison. Turkmenistan is the center of attention, and for once, it's not concerning another statue of a dog on a horse. It's about trade, transit, and our favorite, geopolitics. So strap in as we're in for a bumpy ride through Central Asia.
Over a year ago, Turkmenistan, which boasts some of the world's largest natural gas reserves, signaled serious interest in exporting to Western markets. As a consequence, in March 2023, Turkmen President Serdar Berdimuhamedov and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan signed a key agreement to enable a gas swap deal, with Turkmenistan sending gas to Turkey via Iran. However, progress has been slow. Despite initial optimism, the agreement has yet to be finalized. Turkish Energy Minister, who visited Turkmenistan in July, was expected to secure the deal for 1.5 to 2 billion cubic meters of gas annually, with potential exports to Europe starting in 2025. However, negotiations stalled, and the official returned with little more than an agreement to continue talks. Turkmen authorities have been slow to commit, raising concerns about their reliability as energy partners. The situation mirrors a similar gas swap deal between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan, which initially succeeded but then faltered over pricing disagreements. Some speculate that Turkmenistan may be pushing for higher prices in its negotiations with Turkey as well. While Turkey remains keen to secure Turkmen gas to diversify its energy sources, it has other options. Recently, Ankara secured LNG deals with ExxonMobil and Shell, making Turkmen gas less critical. The situation puts Turkmenistan in a difficult position, as Turkey remains its best option for a new export route. However, Turkmenistan's history of hesitance in finalizing export projects casts doubt on its ability to prove itself as a reliable gas supplier in the competitive global market.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Now, if you know anything about Turkmenistan, and let's be real, it probably isn't a lot, this country is constitutionally neutral. That means Turkmenistan is like the Switzerland of Central Asia if Switzerland was an authoritarian hermit kingdom. For decades, it's been content to sit in a corner, keeping quiet, and being largely ignored by everyone except human rights activists and occasionally the Guinness Book of World Records for some bizarre architectural achievements. But things are changing. Turkmenistan is becoming a key player in global trade routes. While we've been looking elsewhere, Turkmenistan has quietly positioned itself at the new crossroads of two major trade routes, north-south and east-west corridors. This country is now becoming a significant transit hub, connecting China to Europe, Russia to South Asia, and even Iran to, well, wherever it can get its good without being sanctioned. But the sudden opening isn't just a logistical matter of connecting A to B. It's more of a power play. Major players like Russia, China, and even the West have their eyes on these routes. And Turkmenistan? Well, they're trying to cash in on both sides. Think of them as the shrewd kid on the playground playing both teams in a tug-of-war, hoping to walk away victorious. So, what's driving all this? Well, recently we saw two major developments that put Turkmenistan on the spotlight. First, Ashgabat signed a deal with Russia, Iran, and Kazakhstan to develop a north-south transit corridor. This is a big deal because Russia, which had been eyeing routes through the Caucasus and Caspian Sea, is now turning to Turkmenistan due to instability and capacity issues. The second big move is an agreement with Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Romania to create a Caspian Sea-Black Sea corridor. You see, China has been trying to move goods to Europe while avoiding Russian influence. And the West, well, they're all about that alternative routes now that trade through Moscow is not possible. And now suddenly everyone's interested in Turkmenistan. They're the hot new commodity in the Central Asian transport scene. You've heard the phrase, all road leads to Rome? Well, in this case, all road seems to be leading straight to Ashgabat. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Bruce Penier, a Central Asia researcher at the Caspian Policy Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, today we are focusing on Turkmenistan, which is a country that is relatively unknown to the rest of the world. Now, spoilers alert, before we start rolling, Bruce told me that this is actually one of the craziest countries in the world in terms of the story behind it. So can you shed some light on that?
Yes. Well, first, I would say that it's not surprising that it's one of the least known countries in the world. Turkmenistan is an isolationist country. People have compared it to North Korea. It's very difficult to get in even as a tourist. They don't like foreigners to come into the country. They don't like foreign news to come into the country. A lot of things that happen in the world are unknown to the people. Or even inside the country, earthquakes, so heavy storms aren't reported. But, when the U.S. launched its operation in Afghanistan, they didn't report on that. They don't report on presidents dying and new leaders coming all the time. The country's got about 5 million people living in it, right? It's got the fourth largest reserves of natural gas in the world. So you would figure that it would be a fairly well-to-do country. But actually, the opposite is true. The kleptocracy, the ruling family in that country is just taking as much money as they can out of that. It's illegal to report on revenue from the gas sales. The U.S. State Department just released a report which was actually supposed to encourage investment in Turkmenistan, but it said there was $45 billion in foreign currency outside the country, in banks outside the country. So what you've ended up with is this strange country that's isolated from the world. It's sealed itself off. And in the meantime, this form of leadership has evolved that's totally bizarre. It's like the extreme worship of the great leader. This started with the first president, who was Saparmurat Niyazov. He called himself Turkmenbashi, literally the head of the Turkmen, right? And everyone had to refer to him that way. The state media referred to him that way. He undertook a bunch of changes which didn't seem to make much sense at all. I mean, he was obviously the supreme leader, right? But after a while, he decided he wanted to change the names of the days of the week and the names of the months of the year. So he changed them to what he said were traditional Turkmen names. But for instance, one of the names of the months of the year was his mother's name, Gurban Sultan. That he finally died. And they got a new guy that came in who was the health minister and had previously been the dentist for President Niyazov, Gurbanguly Berdimuhammedov. He comes in. He was the former health minister, Niyazov's dentist, like I said. His greatest achievements as health minister were to shut down all the regional health clinics in the country. So at first he seemed to be kind of a normal person, but gradually he started to get pulled into this personality cult too. He refers to himself, he wanted to be referred to himself as Arkadog, which in Turkmen means the protector, right? So now all the media has to refer to him like that. They refer to him as the hero Arkadog and everything that they say, the hero protector. He was on TV all the time, playing guitar, reciting poetry that supposedly he wrote, going out with the military and shooting machine guns, driving around the desert in off-road vehicles, like a madman, and all the time. And in the meantime, the standard of living in the country is plummeting. Despite the fact that they have all this natural gas that they're exporting, the standard of living is plummeting. And people, when they turn on TV and all they get is state TV and state radio, and they see this guy up there acting like a DJ with his grandson, out by the coast, by the Caspian coast, he finally stepped down a couple of years ago, but he handed over power to his son. And then after a few months, Gurbanguly Berdimuhammedov decided that it was no fun for him to be retired. So he recreated the post of chairman of the People's Council, which was a nothing body. But all of a sudden, all the power of the country went into the People's Council. And he, as the chairman, is actually supreme leader. And his son, who's the president of the country, is subordinate to him again. So, like I said, you could go on and on about the eccentricities, and that's being very kind, of the way this country is governed. It's horribly mismanaged. They don't have any real friends in the world. If you listen to state media in Turkmenistan, it's the greatest place in the world to live in. They have everything that you could possibly want. The standard of living is better than anybody. The crises of the world are mitigated by the wise leadership of the Turkmen government, who protects them from all the evils that are outside the country. I mean, it just, the list goes on and on. It's really one of the strangest places in existence today.
Wait, strange is very much an understatement. We're looking at something that is almost fantastical when it comes to what's going on inside the country. It's just, well, very mind-boggling to me when you mentioned it. In this era of globalization and a population of 5 million, doesn't the news ever get out or get in? Is there, like, do they not have access to the internet? Is it so tightly controlled that they're able to maintain this isolationism?
Yeah, well, okay, we'll start with the internet. They are close partners with China. China is actually their biggest gas customer. China, about 15 years ago, finally finished off the first part of a network of pipelines that went from Turkmenistan all the way to China, and it brings gas. In fact, Turkmenistan is often the leading supplier of gas to China, at least by pipeline. So China is the main customer, and in return, China, because they have this solid partner for gas in Turkmenistan, they've given them technology to help block internet sites. Turkmenistan blocks more internet sites than any other country in the world. So you can't get, literally billions of sites are unavailable inside Turkmenistan. So a lot of people were getting VPNs on their mobile phone so that they could finally access some of the information in the outside world. So, but the Turkmen government, if they catch you with a VPN on the phone, and the police can stop you on the street and ask to see your phone. And if you have a VPN installed, you get a warning. But the next time, the consequences are much more severe. You can end up being in jail. You can end up being fined a huge amount of money. So I mean that is one thing that helps to isolate them from the world. Now they do let some people out of the country, shuttle traders, because again, even with this small population and all this gas, the unemployment problem is enormous. We don't know the true scale of it, but conservative estimates say that 60% of the eligible workforce is unemployed. So they do get to go outside the country. Most of them were going to Turkey until the Turkmen government requested the Turkish government to cancel the visa-free regime that existed for Turkmen citizens. So now Turkmen citizens have to get a visa like citizens of other countries in order to come into Turkey, which of course reduced the number of people who were coming from Turkmenistan to do shuttle trading out there. Also reduced the amount of income they were bringing back from selling stuff in Turkey too. But like I said, so it defies logic. You would figure that they need the money. These people are unemployed, and at the same time, the Turkmen government makes it almost impossible for them to leave the country and go out and find employment. So I mean, these are just some of the things they do. And like I said, you have to have a visa to come into Turkmenistan. I was there years ago when it was much easier to get into the country. But now the process is almost impossible unless you come as a tourist group and are willing to. You have a guide appointed for you. That guide is also working for the security ministry, of course, and they watch everyone that's in that tour group. They take you from place to place, keep an eye on everybody that's there, make sure they're not mingling with the local people in any way at all. And then when your time is done, they make sure that you get to the airport and get out of the country. You can't stray from the tour group, or you'll get thrown out of the country right away. If you are invited for an international conference, then you are flown right to the area where this conference is happening, usually in the capital, but sometimes in their quote-unquote Caspian resort area, Baza. And again, you're watched the entire time you're there. And when you're done, they make sure that you get to the airport and leave the country without looking around. So it's impossible to move around the country at all if you are a foreigner.
Right. Well, first of all, I find it very outrageous that they don't even have access to TVP World and Eastern Express. But second of all, we are looking at a country who is just now becoming kind of a center of focus when it comes to transportation. This is slowly becoming a hub due to its geopolitical influence and its positioning. Do you think that might affect Turkmenistan's population's access to the outside world? Or do you think the government will still be able to keep that tight control even with all that traffic going in and out?
They have been having some problems with that. And of course, these problems are going to multiply in the coming years. Turkmenistan is technically, and if you look at the map, geographically, part of the middle corridor, right? And they've spent a lot of money. The government spent a lot of money on improving the railway system. They put $1.5 billion into upgrading the port at Turkmenbashi city, and we remember that Turkmenbashi was, of course, the first president. He named the city after himself on the Caspian coast. It still has that name. But they spent $1.5 billion on the port structure so that they could ship goods across the Caspian to Azerbaijan. unfortunately, until recently, it was very difficult to get goods into Turkmenistan. It was just a few years ago that if you showed up with a truck or a train at the Turkmen border, the customs people would stop it. If it was a truck, you had to unload all your goods onto a Turkmen truck with a Turkmen driver, who would then take it to the next border where it would be unloaded again. In the case of Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, to an Uzbek or Kazakh truck with an Uzbek or Kazakh driver. But you couldn't just drive across the country. They've kind of eased some of those restrictions. There are some countries where they do let the drivers in, but a train, for instance, is stuck at the border for a long time while they search and look at this. The government has been paranoid about being overthrown, for 30 years. With good reason, because they are very unpopular in the country, even though the security force makes sure that when the president's anywhere, it looks like everyone loves him. But the fact is that I think they're aware that they are a very unpopular government. So they're always worried about coup plots, and it really restricts trade through there. So on paper, again, there should be a huge part of this middle corridor and benefiting from it. And a lot of countries are pushing them to open up. China being one, Iran being another, and of course their Central Asian neighbors also are saying, look, you want to be a part of this, that's great, but we can't have this bottleneck there. So you're going to have to open up your country a little bit. Now that when you open up the country a little bit and start letting more foreigners drive through or go through on the train or whatever, naturally they're going to run into people every now and then, and people are curious about what's happening with the outside world. So this is going to be one of those things that they're going to have to really watch and clamp down on in the future. They've been successful at finding out, the internet's a great example. They weren't real savvy on how to use this and all the technology. But as people started to get information that the Turkmen authorities didn't want inside the country, they became more adept at finding ways of countering this. And it's the same with their communications with foreigners or other people foreigners that come through the country. They're watched, as I said, but I mean, as they look and see that people are finding ways to get information that the Turkmen government doesn't want, they find new ways to shut that down and shut those channels out, so that it's impossible for Turkmen people to interact with other people. And it's to the point now where if you're a Turkmen citizen on the street and a foreigner approaches you, you probably won't want to talk to them, because you'll be sure that there's a security person watching. And the first thing that'll happen when this foreigner leaves is the security person will come up and ask you if you know that person. What did you talk about? Are you sure that you'd never seen them before? All that kind of stuff. So it's really intimidating for the population inside the country.
Right. It is very interesting situation going on there, and some very jaw-dropping facts there. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. Always a pleasure.
Appreciate it. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Now, keeping up with the demands of the Russian war machine has once again led to the introduction of new laws in the country. On October 2nd, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a bill that exempts defendants from criminal charges if they join the Russian military.
The law targets individuals in pre-trial detention, with Russian authorities aiming to conscript around 40% of the nearly 60,000 inmates held across 210 detention centers. The legislation allows defendants facing trial or sentencing to have their cases suspended if they join the military during wartime or mobilization. Criminal charges will be dropped entirely if they receive a state award or are discharged due to age, health, or the end of mobilization. Russia has been recruiting convicts for the war since 2022, initially through the Wagner mercenary group and later via the Russian Defense Ministry. In addition to the prisoner recruitment, Putin signed a decree to conscript 133,000 men aged 18 to 30 between October and January as part of the regular fall conscription, including in illegally annexed Ukrainian territories.
German media outlet reported that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is considering speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin in November, potentially becoming the first Western leader to do so since 2022. The conversation was to occur before the G20 summit in Brazil.
Formal plans for the call have not yet been confirmed. Moreover, speaking at the Warsaw Security Forum with TVP World, Anna Lerman, the German Minister of State for Europe and Climate, dismissed the reports.
That's not true.
Is it not true?
He said in an interview a few weeks ago that if time arises, there might be a potential that maybe, but this clearly is in the context of the ongoing efforts also together with Ukraine to work on the peace formula of President Zelensky, on the ongoing effort of having another round of a peace conference. I attended the one now in Switzerland. So this is not an imminent...
It's not going to happen, basically, this phone call from
not an imminent
Olaf Scholz
thing, no.
Okay.
Chancellor Scholz has emphasized that any negotiations on a ceasefire in Ukraine would require Putin's direct involvement. The German official reportedly consulted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a visit to the US in September about this potential dialogue.
According to the Ukrainian ombudsman, around 1.5 million Ukrainian children in Russian-occupied territories are at high risk of deportation to Russia. Independent data shows that since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, more than 20,000 children have already been abducted, with fewer than 400 returned.
The deported children often have their personal data altered to prevent family members from locating them. Many are sent to re-education camps, where they are subjected to Russian propaganda, forcing them to renounce their Ukrainian heritage. Children from orphanages in the Kherson region have reportedly been relocated to occupied areas before being taken to Russia, with some illegally adopted by Russian families. The Ukrainian ombudsman accuses Russia of deliberately stalling efforts to repatriate these children. In March 2023, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova over their involvement in the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention and a war crime under international law.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.